So these are the things that you're going to need for this tutorial, minus a couple of items. That being lining and interfacing. I used it in this tutorial, but it is optional. That's why I didn't add it. I didn't want anyone to feel pressured to have to go and get it if they couldn't. But these are the items. So you're going to need your fabric. You're going to need your 3 pattern pieces. And this I got out of using a downloaded bodice block online. I'll leave the website for where I got the bodice block. I basically converted it into a sweetheart bodice. Some chalk, some embellishments. I have here a rhinestone trim, some thread to match your fabric, scissors, pins, and measuring tape. So as you see, I've already made my bodice pattern, so let's get into how I made the skirt. In my last video, I cut the skirt before I went on ahead and started recording. So for this video, I said I would go through how I made the skirt, well, how I transferred the measurements to make the skirt. So, for instance, I am 5'2½". From my waist to the floor is about 42 inches. So for the dress that we're making, because we want the fitted part of the skirt to stop right above your knees, you're basically going to measure down about, let's just say about 18 inches. So you're going to mark there, and then you're going to mark where your 18 inches starts. Now, whenever you're making anything, you want to make sure you leave at least about 1 inch to ½ an inch from the top of the fabric. That will allow for your seam allowance or any uneven edges that may exist at the top. So once you mark that, I mark on both sides of my tape just so that I can use a ruler to follow it. So now we know that the length of the skirt is going to be about 18 inches. You want to find where your hips, it's the largest part of your hips from your waist. So from your waist, it's going to be about 8. Well, mine is 8. So my hips are at its biggest around 8. So I'm going to mark right there around 8 on both sides of the tape. And I know that I have my waist, my hips, and then where my knees should, well, where I want it to get slimmer around my thigh knee area there. So after I do that, I'm going to take my ruler, align it to my 2 markings, okay. So now I have my 3 points that I really need. So my waist is 27 inches. So with the 27 inches, here, if let's just say this would be the fold. So mind you, this would be the fold right here. So I'm going to put the fold to where 7 is. That gives me 28 inches because mind you, we're on a fold. So 7 and 7 is 14. So when we open up the front, it's going to be 14. So when we use this to also make the back, it's also going to give us a back waist of 14. Okay, so we know that that's 14. But we want to add darts to it. So I am then going to add another inch. So adding that inch will give me a total of 32 inches for the waist. We don't need 32 inches, but this is how we're going to correct it. So 8 will give us 32, right? Okay. Now let's back that back on up to the 7. So I'm 27 inches. I don't need my waist to be 28 inches. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to then back that up by another ½ an inch. That ½ an inch will give me what my true waist is, which is that ½ an inch will give me what my true waist is, which is 27. Here's where you have to pay attention. 27 is what the skirt should be after I'm finished sewing, so you have to give it a seam allowance. Bear this in mind. Now that seam allowance can be anywhere between 5/8 or 1/2 inch or 1 inch, whatever makes you comfortable. But we need to know that the true waist is 27. So half of that would be 6.5. So for my seam allowance, I always add 1/2 inch. Hence why I mark it at the 7-inch line, because this will be 28 right here. When I mark here for my seam allowance, it's going to take away 1/2 inch on each side, giving me my 27 inches. So we figured that out, right? Okay, so here it gets trickier. We want to add front darts. You can, if you want to, you can decide not to add front darts. For this dress, I want to add front darts, so then I'm going to add another inch. So I'm going to now move the folds over to the 8 inches, and that's where I'm going to mark, because I'm going to add a 1 inch dart. So for my 1 inch dart, let's go ahead and move the measuring tape back to the 7. That's where the fold is. You're gonna measure half, what's the pretty much the half distance from the 7 to, you know, whatever, wherever the half point mark is. So the half point mark is 3.5, right? So you're gonna mark 3.5, mark it right there. And then after you mark your 3.5, you're then gonna mark 1 inch away from that 3.5 mark that you put. That will account for your dart. I hope y'all understand that. Okay, so now for my hips. My hips are generally 42, sometimes 43, but at this moment it's 42. So I'm gonna keep it at 42. But in order to do that, so we're doing the front. Everybody's body shape is different. I hold most of my waist in my back, so I don't need the, I hold most of my hips in my back, so I don't need the hips to extend that far out. So we're going to divide that 42 in half. So that's going to give us 21, right? 21. So generally you would mark 10.5 to be your 21. But because it's my front and I don't really carry my waist, or sorry, my hips in my front, I'm going to mark it at 10.5. Now that 10.5 is going to give me 21, but I'm not going to add a seam allowance, because technically speaking, I'm going to keep that 10.5, that half inch that I added to the 10 is going to be my seam allowance. So the front of my skirt is not going to be, after I sew it, the front of my skirt is not going to be 21 inches. It's actually going to be 20 inches. So I'm going to mark right there at 20 inches. Okay, now around my thigh area. So around my thigh area, in the last video I said you want to subtract 3 inches. That's true, but you want to subtract a total of 3 inches from the full front when you open it up. So you're technically going to be taking away about half an inch, about 1.5 inches from this area, and then it will give you a combined total of 3 for the front, and then the same for the back. You'll have 3 for the back, which will give you a total of 6 inches subtracted. So here, what was I? It was, if I was to do it half and half, it would have been 10.5, right? So I'm going to mark at the 9. I'm going to put my measuring tape at 9, where the fold is, and that's where I'm going to mark. Okay, so there it goes right there. So to make this work, you're going to go on ahead and just connect these points. There goes your basic pattern for the skirt. Now you can also use this for a pencil skirt too, you just got to make it longer. So in order to make this work for you, you can't have this sharp point right here. So you're gonna curve it out. Okay. So once you carve that out, you're basically done with the front skirt. I'm going to mark 1/2 inch on the top. There you go. So you're going to use this to make the back. So with the back, you definitely want to add a zipper allowance, but you also want to add, you remember how I took out about 2 inches off the front? I'm going to add that to my back. So I'll line it up with the top edge. Right there. So adding 2 inches to the back, while it's on a fold, the back also fabric also needs to be on a fold. I don't have it on a fold just because I'm demonstrating. So you measure out 1 inch out where the largest part of your hips is, and you basically, I just curve that inwards. Voila! There's your back. Your back's done. So, sorry, I lied. So you're not just going to cut this out. Now you need your zip allowance. So I add 1 inch for my zip allowance. So when you do decide to cut this, mind you, straight edge to a fold. This you can just lay it down on your fabric, but make sure it's on a fold and cut it so you can get 2 pieces of this. So that's how I make the skirt, or that's how I make my skirt with my measurements. Now that you have all your patterns, you're going to use it to cut your fabric. So after you cut your fabric, you're then going to use your the fabric that you cut, or you can use the patterns to go on ahead and also cut some lining. Now lining is optional. I do advise to use it because it just makes your garment look more professional and more quality. So you're going to use the pattern that you made to cut out the pieces for your fabric, and then you're going to use those pieces to cut out your lining. So that's pretty much what I'm doing right now. Done cutting the lining, generally what I like to do is I like to add interfacing to the pieces that I've cut. You can do it to the fabric itself, or you can do it to the lining. It's up to you, but I do suggest you do it. So I'm gonna go and sew these together. So I'm gonna sew side to side of both sets, the lining and the actual fabric. You're basically gonna sew side again to side, and you're gonna do it the same for the lining. So once you're done with that, you're somewhat done making the top part, or at least piecing them together. Then you're gonna piece together or sew together the front lining of your skirt with the back lining of your skirt, and the back of your skirt with the front of your skirt. Do not forget to do the darts. The darts usually extend down about 6 inches from the top or from the waist of the skirt. So you're going to do that for all 4 pieces. So now that I've sewn all the pieces together, this is what your top part should look like, and this is the inside of it, okay? And here is the bottom part, the skirt. So this is what it looks like. So all I did next was I pressed down all the seams to make them flat. Next thing you're gonna do now is pretty much sew the two top pieces together. So best way to do this is align it seam to seam and then pin them together. So you're gonna sew all along the top part of the bodice. After you're done sewing along the top part of the bodice, you're gonna fold the seam over. So let's just say it'll look like this. You'll fold it over, and then you'll sew down over the fabric. And you're gonna do that when you fold it, because it's gonna be sewn here. When you fold it over like this, it'll kind of look somewhat like this, and you just sew along the edge of it. That'll make it nice and flat, and you're gonna do that along the whole top part of the bodice. So I went on ahead and I sewed the two pieces together. So boning, I'm gonna put boning in the front. So you're gonna take your boning, pretty much just kind of measure it out. And then cut. So the channel that I made for my boning, I'm just gonna insert it through. So I kind of like to cut the top part of the boning so it's kind of more pointy, and it makes it just go through the channel a little easier. So I didn't mention when I was doing it, I did make some boning channels, and that's all that is that after you sew, so let's pretend we sew this, right? After you sew, you're just gonna turn it over on one side and then sew that down, and that gives you a channel for which you can put in the boning. So that's what I did for the front bust seams. So now that I have that done, I'm going to take my skirt, open up, the long stitches where I'm gonna place my zipper, and then I'm going to align it seam to seam. So side seam to side seam. Where is it? So here is the side seam. Gonna align that. Here's the other side seam. Gonna align that. So after you pin the side, after you pin the top and the bottom together, you're then gonna sew along the top. So once you're done with that, you're pretty much gonna do the same with the lining if you chose to do lining. So now that I've sewn both pieces together, the top to the skirt on both sides, the fabric and the lining, you're then gonna lay it out flat like this. And what you wanna do is you wanna get your measurement. You wanna get your measurements for your back. So all I do is I take this right here, put it to the fold, put that to the bust, stretch it out a little bit just to make sure it's flat as I go, and mark it at 18. So 18 is where I want to mark this. After you mark it, After you pretty much mark it, you then go to the waist. Mark it to where your waist is. Mine's is 27, so that'll be 13 and a half. I'm a little bit off by about 1/4 of an inch, but that's fine. It's not really gonna make much of a difference. And then you sew, like, you basically draw a line connecting those 2 points, and then you sew down that line. So after you sew down that line, you'll just open it up and iron it to make it flat. After you iron it, you're gonna install your zipper. So this is the rest of my fabric. Now, since I had previously used this fabric for something else, after I cut out everything else, after I cut out all the stuff I needed for the top part of the dress, I only have 3.5 yards left. Wish I had 4.5, because then I could have made a circle skirt, but whatever. It's cool, it's cool, it's cool, it's cool. So what I'm now gonna do is, I want to keep it this length because I want the dress to be extremely flamboyant. So what I'm going to do is, I'm basically going to gather along the top part of the fabric. I'm just gonna gather everything. I'm gonna keep it whole and just gather. Now, as for the bottom, I'm just gonna fold over and then fold over again and stitch that down. So I'm gonna do that to the whole length of the fabric, and then I'll be back so we can join it. After you gather it, you then wanna take the 2 open edges, align them together, pin it in place, and then you're gonna sew these 2 pieces together like that. Once you're done with that, you're then gonna join them to the top part of your dress. Once you join the bottom and the top of the skirt, your dress is finished. So this is the finished dress. You can basically, from this point, you can do whatever you want to do it. You can add some pizzazz, you can do whatever you want. I have some rhinestone trim, so I'm going to use that to kind of like make a choker that's attached to the dress. But you can really do whatever you want. You can kind of put it on the seams, or, you know, crisscross it throughout. The imagination is limitless. So that's pretty much it. Now, as for the dress, after I tried it on and realized that I didn't get the flamboyancy that I wanted due to short girl problems, I realized I had to trim some up. But no worries, I can just use that as a headband. So here's the bottom of the skirt. All I did was I folded it in half. I folded it in half one time, and then I folded it again. So you pretty much have you should have 4 pieces of fabric laid out in front of you, with a whole fold on this side and 2 folds on this side. So I laid that out. Again, I'm 5'2", and a half. So I'm going to cut off, let's say about I'm gonna cut off like 10 inches. That's much better. So now I'm just gonna go ahead and fold this part over, and then fold it over again and stitch all around the circumference. Now we're done. And here is the final dress. I must say I love these colors. As you can see, I did a rhinestone choker, which I attached to the bodice, and I am working it. Girl, yes. If you like this video and want to see more videos from me, go on ahead and hit that subscribe button. Of course, if you like it, let's go on ahead and hit that like button too. And if you want to leave any comments or questions, please go on ahead and do that in the comment box. Until we meet again, enjoy the rest of your week.